General Hospital spoilers tease that beneath the academic respectability of Port Charles University, secrets were fermenting with far-reaching consequences. Professor Dalton had arrived at PCU with impressive credentials and an enigmatic past, drawing both admiration and suspicion. Few questioned why a scientist of his caliber had chosen such a quiet institution, but fewer still knew about his covert ties to a global research syndicate operating beyond ethical boundaries. Dalton's connection to the WSB was tenuous but real. He had first surfaced in classified surveillance files linked to unauthorized genetic experiments conducted on animals in California. There, under various pseudonyms, he had pushed the limits of neurological research, specifically focusing on hereditary diseases that impacted cognition and motor function. His disappearance from the California lab had coincided with the sudden shutdown of the entire facility after a whistleblower triggered an investigation. Months later, he quietly re-emerged at PCU, his past scrubbed clean, his identity reshaped, and his purpose redirected. That purpose became clear once his partnership with Britt Westbourne surfaced, though not through public announcements or departmental conferences. It was in the hushed voices of late-night staffers who caught glimpses of shadowy meetings, in the secrecy of locked lab doors, and in the subtle shift in Britt's demeanor. She had always been guarded, a woman used to carrying the weight of her legacy, but now she seemed driven by something more than ambition. There was desperation in her silence, purpose in her exhaustion. Britt, the daughter of the infamous Caesar Faison, carried within her the genetic legacy of darkness. The Huntington's disease gene, an invisible sentence of neurological decay, coursed through her blood. She had watched her father's mind deteriorate into madness, and though her relationship with him was complicated, that fate terrified her. For years she had lived with the knowledge that her body was ticking toward collapse. She had tried to hide the symptoms, the hand tremors, the sudden stutters, the fog that sometimes settled over her sharp intellect, but she knew better. She was losing time. When Dalton entered her life, he offered her more than science. He offered a chance at reprieve. Together, in the shadows of PCU's underfunded medical research wing, Britt and Dalton had constructed a lab that doubled as a sanctuary and a trap. Using outdated equipment and resources siphoned from black market connections, they worked furiously to identify, isolate, and counteract the aggressive proteins triggered by the Huntington gene. Months of failures nearly broke them, but eventually, through sleepless nights and whispered calculations, they found what appeared to be a promising antibody. It wasn't a cure, not yet, but it slowed the symptoms. In Britt, the tremors subsided. Her thoughts cleared. She could sleep again without fearing that her body would betray her in the dark. But there was a catch. The antibody required nightly injections. A missed dose meant regression. The therapy was powerful but unstable, and its long-term effects remained uncertain. Britt had become the test subject in her own desperate trial, and the results were terrifyingly inconsistent. Still, they pressed on, refining, recalibrating, hopeful that they were on the brink of something revolutionary. Their work did not go unnoticed. The man funding their research, known only to them as a faceless executive operating through encrypted channels and overseas bank transfers, began exerting pressure. He wanted results, and he wanted them scalable. Orders from wealthy clients suffering from Huntington's began piling up through back channels. Their benefactors saw only the dollar signs of a cure. Britt and Dalton, meanwhile, bore the brunt of impossible expectations. What neither of them admitted aloud was that they were no longer just researchers. They were captives of a machine that promised wealth and power in exchange for their lives. During this time, fate brought Jason Morgan back into Britt's orbit. Their reunion was accidental at first. A chance encounter at the hospital turned into coffee, which turned into long conversations behind closed doors. For a time, Britt considered not telling him anything. She didn't want him pulled into her disaster. But her fear got the better of her, and one night, after a particularly difficult episode when the tremors returned even after the injection, she broke down and told him everything. Jason listened in silence as Britt described the research, the partnership with Dalton, the shadowy investor, and her fear that if they succeeded, they would be eliminated to protect the formula. Jason's expression darkened. He had spent his life navigating the periphery of crime, betrayal, and power. He knew too well what men like their benefactor were capable of. Jason promised her protection, no matter the cost. Britt's relief was palpable, but it was short-lived. Dalton began to waver. The closer they got to a stable formula, the more paranoid he became. He started taking duplicate notes, storing backups in hidden locations, keeping flash drives on his person at all times. Britt confronted him about it, and he exploded. His fear, raw and unfiltered, made clear that he no longer believed they were partners. To him, she was now a liability. Dalton insisted that the formula would be delivered to their employer the moment they confirmed its stability. He didn't care about the consequences. If they didn't comply, their employer would find other ways to extract what he needed. Better to survive as collaborators than die as rebels, he argued. Britt refused. The formula had to be protected. She had trusted Dalton once, but now she feared he would sell them both out just to save himself. The betrayal stung, but more than that, it endangered not only their lives but the potential lives of those who might one day be cured. When she told Jason about Dalton's shift in allegiance, he asked her a simple question. "What do you want me to do?" She didn't answer right away. The implications were heavy. If Dalton delivered the formula, the research would be weaponized for profit. If he was silenced, the employer might believe the formula had failed. They could buy time, maybe even escape. Eventually, she whispered the unthinkable. "He has to be stopped. For good." Jason didn't flinch. He asked for details: where Dalton kept his notes, how he transported data, what time he usually arrived at the lab. Every word she gave him felt like a betrayal, but she kept going, reminding herself this was the only way to keep the research safe and protect others from becoming test subjects like herself. But Dalton wasn't a fool. He had been monitoring Britt as carefully as she monitored him. When he noticed Jason loitering near the lab building late one evening, he understood what was happening. In a panic, he tried to move the formula first to a secure flash drive, then onto a hidden server. He texted their employer a cryptic message: "Formula ready. Delivering soon. Situation compromised." That message set off a chain reaction neither he nor Britt had anticipated. Now the employer knew there was betrayal in the air. And in the world they operated in, betrayal had only one outcome. What followed was a game of cat and mouse. Jason followed Dalton, but Dalton had already ditched the real formula and planted a decoy. When Jason retrieved it and handed it over to Britt, she knew immediately it was wrong. Dalton had encrypted the data differently. Worse, he had added traces of corrupted code, something that, if used, could compromise future testing. He had made sure that if she chose to remove him, she wouldn't get what she wanted. Enraged, Britt turned to the last backup, the one Dalton didn't know she still had. A sample of the formula she had secretly copied and stored on a hidden drive, separate from the lab's servers. But it was unstable, incomplete, lacking the final compound Dalton had synthesized in the last phase. She was close. So close. But not close enough. As the walls closed in, Jason laid out the options. Either they fled and buried the research, or they gambled on completing the formula and delivering it on their terms, publicly, with full transparency, forcing the employer's hand and stripping him of his leverage. Britt hesitated. Then she made her choice. Britt's choice ignited a sequence of events that neither she nor Jason could have entirely predicted. She knew the moment she decided to complete the formula and bring it into the light that there would be no turning back. They were now racing not only against the progression of her illness but also against the calculated wrath of a man whose empire stood to collapse if exposed. The employer's reach was vast, his resources limitless, and he had made careers out of destroying people who failed him. Still, Britt refused to let fear dictate her next move. Her life had already been shortened by Huntington's. She had nothing left to lose except the chance to create something good from everything that had broken her. Jason orchestrated the shift of operations away from PCU. It was no longer safe. Dalton had vanished, presumably hiding, or perhaps being watched by the employer himself. Jason, with his network of trusted allies, found a secure location on the outskirts of Port Charles, an old estate with a basement lab unused for decades. With Britt's backup sample and notes, they began again. There was no official equipment, no academic support, but there was silence, and there was time. Jason stayed by Britt's side, not only for protection but to assist her with whatever she needed, stabilizing power supplies, obtaining chemicals through back channels, tracking digital threats that might indicate the employer was closing in. During the long hours in the lab, Britt's symptoms returned with more intensity. The experimental injections no longer provided consistent relief. Some nights, Jason had to help her hold the pipette steady. Other nights she would break down in his arms, not because of the pain, but because of the frustration. She had fought so hard to reclaim her life, and now, on the verge of saving herself, she was slipping away. Still, she persisted, logging every breakthrough, every failure, carefully reconstructing the missing elements of Dalton's final synthesis. He had left gaps in the code, omissions she was now able to reverse engineer from old notes and her photographic memory. She didn't need Dalton anymore. She was going to finish this alone. But Dalton was not truly gone. From a distance, he watched them. His paranoia had only grown. He believed Britt and Jason were preparing to steal everything he'd worked for, and worse, he feared the employer might already think he had betrayed them both. So, in a desperate move, Dalton reached out to the one person he believed might still listen, Britt. He sent a message, encrypted and unsigned, but unmistakably his. It said, simply, "You're making a mistake. He knows where you are." Britt stared at the screen in silence. Jason immediately insisted they relocate again, but Britt shook her head. She refused to run anymore. The formula was nearly complete. If they abandoned the lab now, it would take weeks to re-establish the delicate processes she had rebuilt. She told Jason they would stay, just long enough to finish the antibody, to make it stable, to document it in a way that could be duplicated by others if needed. Jason agreed, but with one condition: Dalton had to be found. They needed to know if he was working with the employer or if he, too, was on the run. Jason called in favors, scoured Dalton's known safehouses, traced old contacts. It wasn't long before he tracked Dalton to a dilapidated motel in upstate New York. When Jason arrived, Dalton was a shell of the confident man he'd once been: gaunt, trembling, armed with a rusted pistol and half-mad from sleep deprivation. Dalton confessed everything. He had tried to sell the formula prematurely, hoping to buy safety with a partial version. But the employer saw through the deception and demanded the complete formula. Now, Dalton was sure he was being hunted. In his fear, he begged Jason for protection, insisting he never meant to betray Britt, only to survive. Jason didn't make promises. He took Dalton's remaining files, every note, every drive, and left him there, telling him only, "If you ever contact her again, you won't have time to regret it." Back in the lab, with the missing data recovered, Britt finally synthesized the full antibody. The solution was stable for more than 72 hours without refrigeration. It passed her internal tests. She administered the new injection on a trembling hand and waited. Hours passed. The tremors stopped. Clarity returned. It held. They had done it. But celebration was cut short by a chilling discovery. Britt noticed strange network pings on the lab's external router. Someone was probing their system, mapping IP addresses. She alerted Jason, who confirmed that the employer had located them. They had days at most. Now the real challenge began: how to release the formula before they were silenced. Britt knew publication through official channels would take weeks and red tape would slow distribution. They needed a global release, something open source, something that couldn't be deleted or covered up. Jason contacted Spinelli, who built a secure server connected to multiple mirrors worldwide. Britt uploaded every version of the formula, along with detailed protocols and independent verification notes. They sent it to trusted researchers, anonymous medical forums, and public disease archives. The formula, once hidden in shadows, was now everywhere. Their mission was complete. That night, as the wind howled outside the estate, Jason sensed something was wrong. He told Britt to hide in the reinforced room below the lab. Moments later, the front door exploded inward. Masked men entered, armed and efficient. Jason met them head-on in the hallway. The sound of gunfire cracked through the silence. Jason took down 2 attackers before another bullet struck his shoulder, sending him to the ground. He managed to grab the final assailant and render him unconscious before collapsing. By the time Britt emerged, the worst was over. Jason was injured, but alive. She rushed to him, applying pressure to the wound, tears staining her face. They had survived, but barely. The employer had sent a warning, a final attempt to silence them, but it was too late. The formula was out. In the days that followed, Britt remained hidden, nursing Jason back to health. News began spreading in underground forums, rumors of a treatment for Huntington's, free and accessible. Doctors across the world downloaded the files. Trials began. Early results were promising. Dalton was never heard from again. But Britt didn't care. She had reclaimed her life, not only for herself but for countless others. Her body still bore the scars of her illness, her research, and her decisions, but now there was hope. Real hope. Jason, once her protector, had become her anchor. They had been forged in fire, and though neither of them spoke of what came next, they both understood it would be together. Far away, in the polished silence of a European office tower, the employer received a message. Formula leaked. They survived. He closed his laptop with a quiet smile. It wasn't over. Not yet. And somewhere deep in his files, he opened a new project folder. Britt Westbourne. Subject number 1. Observe.